Well, it's election time. Ballots will be cast on Tuesday, and either the socialist or the guy who wears the magic underpants will be the president of the United States for the next 4 years. But first, more important matters. There's a football game going to be going on in Washington on Sunday, and even though it's between two losing teams, this should be an exciting, high-scoring game. I'm talking about the Carolina Panthers coming to town to play the Washington Redskins. Washington currently installed as a 3.5-point favorite in this game on BETDAQ. 46 is the total. And we mentioned these are two losing teams, Washington at 3-5, Carolina at 1-6. Panthers have been one of the most disappointing teams in the league this year, but because of the quarterbacks these two teams have and because of the lack of defense these two teams play, particularly Washington, again, we expect some excitement here, expect some fireworks. You look at the Redskins, and they're really the team that Carolina was last year. They have an exciting rookie quarterback who's taking an offense that was not at all explosive before he got there and making it instantly explosive, just what Cam Newton did in Carolina last year. That is exactly what Robert Griffin has done in Washington. And like Carolina last year, Washington has a bad defense. So despite Griffin's best efforts, and he has put forth his best efforts, I mean, this offense is 6th in the league in total offense right now that he's leading, and he has just been an offensive machine himself, both running and passing the ball. But despite all that, they're not going to be able to finish the season with a winning record. They are going to be a losing team because you just cannot be a winning team in the NFL when you have the worst defense in the league or one of them, unless you have a quarterback like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. And even though Robert Griffin III has had an exceptional rookie season, he's just not quite to that level yet. Now, the Carolina Panthers, there's optimism around Washington. We mentioned that they were the team that Carolina was last year. And coming out of last year, even though Carolina was 6-10, there was a lot of optimism surrounding this franchise, but the air has been let out of the balloon this season. Not only has general manager Marty Hurney been fired, but because he's been fired, now everybody's futures within the organization is questioned. Ron Rivera, the head coach, might be on the hottest seat in the NFL because whoever's brought in as the next general manager, he's most likely going to want to find his own guy, his own head coach. Going to want to handpick his head coach. I was having problems getting that out for some reason. But that's what we see mostly in the NFL. It's understandable. I mean, a general manager, you're going to be judged based on the success or the failure of your team. You want a coach you really believe in. And if a guy comes in to take over this Carolina Panthers team, based on what Ron Rivera has done with this team so far, if you didn't have any ties to him before, why would you keep him around? So unless the Panthers show some kind of drastic turnaround over the second half of the season, Ron Rivera will likely be out as head coach. And the future of Cam Newton, I mean, as hard to believe as it is, after last year you were talking about this guy as a foundational player, maybe an elite quarterback for the next 10, 12 years. And now his future in Carolina is in serious question because with a new general manager and a new head coach, we know what usually happens, especially with a team that has a real high draft pick, and Carolina's on that path to having a high draft pick. Usually they want their own quarterback. Especially when you look at Cam Newton, despite all his excitement and the big plays he creates, this guy has been an absolute turnover machine in his year and a half in the NFL. Last year, 17 interceptions. Really wasn't talked about much because he was cut a lot of slack because he was a rookie and he did so many other things so well. But this year that has continued, and he's not being cut the same type of slack this year. We have heard Cam Newton heavily criticized, and he should be heavily criticized because his turnovers have been crucial in a lot of these losses. Carolina, it's not like they've been getting blown out in every game. They've been competitive. Their last 4 losses, they've lost their last 4 games. They've actually lost their last 5 games, but 5 games ago it was not competitive. But their last 4 losses have all been by 5 points or less. This is a team who has not quit yet. They almost beat the Chicago Bears on the road last week. Going on the road this week to face Washington. Again, the Redskins a 3.5-point favorite on BETDAQ. 46 the total. For some reason, even though I've bet against Carolina this year. I have not backed them one time all year. Now, I've also bet against Washington a few times this year, and that hasn't worked out very well for me. The Redskins have been better than I thought they'd be, and they've cost me money a couple of times. Still, this feels like I think this is going to be a close game, one of those games where there's several lead changes. It comes right down to it, just like Carolina's last 3 or 4 games. And like many Washington games this year. I mean, Washington was beaten handily in their last game by the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Carolina's not nearly as good as the Steelers. We've seen what this Redskins team is. I mean, they're going to score lots of points. Carolina's played better on defense over the last couple of weeks. They're still a below-average defense. The Redskins are going to go up and down the field. They're going to score plenty of points. But I do expect that this is the week Cam Newton and that Carolina offense gets it going. All year, people have been waiting on it. People said, well, maybe Defenses have figured out how to stop Cam Newton in this Panthers offense. I don't know what it is. I do know one thing. Washington's defense, which currently ranks dead last in the league in pass defense, 29th in total defense, 28th in points allowed. I think Cam Newton sort of finds his mojo again this week against the new Cam Newton. You know, it's got to irritate Newton that he's no longer the flavor of the month. I mean, all this adulation being heaped upon him last year. Now, anytime he's brought up in the national news, it seems to be he's being criticized. And everything you hear about Robert Griffin III is so positive. I'm sure Newton's taking a little bit of note of that, and I'm sure it would please him to no end to go into Washington, Robert Griffin III's house, so to speak, and get back on track with a 300-yard passing game, touchdowns, rushing touchdowns. We've seen what Cam can do when he gets going. I mean, this guy, especially once he gets that running game going, if they unleash him, and they've tried to over these last few games, he's been more and more involved. But the turnovers, he's just got to cut back on these turnovers. If they want to get this road win, Cam Newton's going to have to limit the turnovers. And I think he'll be able to limit the turnovers somewhat. I don't know if Carolina's going to get the win, but I'll tell you what, Carolina and 3.5 points looks like a decent play to me in this spot.